Welcome to my channel Worldwise, a mega project in which more than 150 countries took part, where promises were made to build new airports, motorways and seaports, where dreams were shown of building the future's Dubai and Singapore. But today, in those very countries, these mega projects appear incomplete and those dreams appear shattered. Some are buried under heavy debts, while others present the sight of ruins. This was China's biggest global mega project, named the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. At one time, people called it the project of the century, but today, it is called a geopolitical disaster, and the ones who suffered the most were the poor countries to whom these rosy dreams were shown. So what really happened that today people are pointing fingers at a superpower like China? In 2013, when Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, shortly called BRI, it was declared the biggest plan of the century. The goal was to create a Silk Road, connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through railways, highways and ports. China's mission was to put poor countries on the path of development and present itself as a global leader. China's vision shocked the world. More than 140 countries showed interest in this plan, and many poor nations immediately began taking loans from China. Soon, China had invested over $1.2 trillion into this project. But this money was not grants. It was loans given to countries that Western banks or the IMF had already refused to lend to, considering them too risky. But soon, the real face of BRI was revealed. It was not just an infrastructure project, but also China's geopolitical and economic agenda. The truth was, China's industrial capacity had become excessively large. Millions of engineers were graduating every year, but finding them jobs inside China was becoming difficult. So China decided to export this capacity, while simultaneously expanding its geopolitical power. The plan was simple: give poor nations loans for BRI projects, deploy Chinese industries and workers to build them, and gain long-term control. The biggest problem with BRI became what the world calls debt trap diplomacy. China gave such large loans to poor countries that they could never pay them back, forcing them to hand over land or critical infrastructure in return. The most famous example is Sri Lanka. Its leaders were shown the dream that if they built a new port in the Indian Ocean, they could become a regional trade hub like Dubai. But Sri Lanka already had the Colombo port, which was a major transshipment hub. Still, China lured them into building a deep-sea port called Hambantota Port. When Sri Lanka borrowed $3 billion from China, conditions followed. Only Chinese firms would construct the port. Interest rates were low, but if repayment failed, China had the right to take control of the project. Construction was completed, but Hambantota Port never became functional. Feasibility studies had already shown that the port wasn't even needed. Only 30-40 ships stopped there in an entire year. Since the port generated no revenue, Sri Lanka couldn't repay the loans. In 2017, the country was forced to lease the port to a Chinese company for 99 years. Now all revenues go to China, while Sri Lanka lost part of its sovereignty. But Sri Lanka was not alone. Zambia, an African nation dependent only on copper exports, also fell into the trap. By 2020, 43% of its total debt was owed to China. When COVID-19 hit, copper demand collapsed, and Zambia defaulted. Many BRI projects turned into white elephants, huge, fancy structures with no practical use. In Montenegro, a small European country, China lent $1 billion in 2014 to build a highway. But planning was so poor that after blasting through mountains, the money ran out. Only 41 kilometers of road was built, leading nowhere. This tiny stretch cost so much that Montenegro's debt rose above 80% of GDP. In Sri Lanka, near Hambantota Port, another project was built, the Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, costing $200 million, funded by Chinese loans. But no airlines or passengers came. Today it is called the world's emptiest airport. Sometimes elephants are seen walking on its runway. In Ecuador, South America, China financed the Coca-Cola Sinclair Dam with $2.6 billion. But Chinese contractors ignored quality standards and bribed officials. The dam now has over 17,000 cracks, threatening collapse, a looming economic, human, and environmental disaster. Then came Pakistan's turn with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, worth $60 billion. Pakistan expected jobs, electricity, and development. Instead, projects were delayed or failed. People in Gwadar protested against water, electricity, and Chinese influence. Jobs never materialized. Today, 91% of Gwadar Port's revenue goes to China, and only 9% stays with Pakistan. BRI also faced a major setback when Italy, the only G7 country to join, announced its withdrawal. Italy realized that Chinese promises brought little economic benefit. Italian leaders later called it a big mistake. Other countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal also cancelled or renegotiated BRI projects. This failure pushed the US and Europe to launch alternatives: PGI-DO, Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, EU's Global Gateway Program. Both promised transparent low-interest loans, avoiding China's debt traps. Meanwhile, BRI brought China and Russia closer. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine feeling isolated, Moscow leaned on China and BRI, forming a new geopolitical axis challenging US dominance. After 10 years and trillions of dollars, the Belt and Road Initiative is now considered the biggest foreign policy failure in modern history. Why? Because BRI was never truly about development. It was about China's own interests, exporting excess capacity, securing raw materials, and expanding geopolitical power. Most loans were in Chinese yuan, promoting its currency globally. But instead of control, China earned the label of a debt trap manipulator. Worse, China's own economy slowed, burdened with unpaid loans and the responsibility of running seized but unprofitable projects. Still, BRI gave China stakes in over 100 ports worldwide, strengthening its export economy. If the full network is ever completed, it would link Asia to Europe through the largest road-rail sea network, covering 65% of the world's population. Today, China is rebranding it as BRI 2.0, focusing on digital infrastructure, green energy, and sustainable projects. But the world is no longer ready to believe in promises alone. Countries now only accept projects that bring real economic benefit, not just more debt. The question remains, while other countries suffered huge losses, did China gain anything? The answer, not as much as it hoped. Instead of being seen as a global savior, China is now viewed with suspicion, its ambitions backfiring. My next video watching now.